Right now, President Trump is on Capitol Hill, and he's huddling privately with House Republicans. Now, some of them have been publicly critical. They may unload even more so in this private meeting.
One of the real tragedies of illegal immigration, that kids are often the greatest victims. We can stop this.
The zero-tolerance policy can be changed by phone call.
The White House could change it in 5 minutes, and they should.
But the president can do it too, and I think it has to be fixed.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump saying this when he arrived on the Hill. This was moments ago.
The system has been broken for many years, the immigration system. It's been a really bad system, probably the worst anywhere in the world. We're going to try and see if we can fix it. Thank you very much.
We are learning that it is now up to 13 members of the Senate Republican caucus formally asking Attorney General Jeff Sessions to stop it, to stop separating these families at the border until at least they can figure out an alternative. Now, today, the top Republican in Congress, Mitch McConnell, at least claims on the record that he is against separating families for any future legislation. Now, remember, before I show you this, Republicans control the Senate and the House right now. They could pass a bill tonight actually doing what Mitch McConnell's talking about, actually stopping this if they want it.
I support, and all of the members of the Republican conference support, a plan that keeps families together while their immigration status is determined.
What we would do is move these families to the head of the line. In the interim, they would be in a humane, safe, and secure family facility, and hopefully we'll get this problem addressed right away.
So that is what this all sounds like in the Capitol, where politicians talk. Meanwhile, out in the country, as we're going to show you tonight, Donald Trump's orders are being enforced. Children split from their parents, in some cases put in cages, and they are crying. And we're starting to hear the leaks, the audio, little slices of what is apparently a nationwide epidemic. Children crying as they struggle to make sense of what's being done to them. That is what these orders sound like when enforced. This is one picture of what it looks like. Now, if you follow politics and you watch the news, you're probably familiar with a basic, pretty iron rule of American politics that's don't compare things to Nazi Germany, because nothing is like Nazi Germany. But I can show you something else happening right now on Fox News of all places. That is the comparison that immigration hardliner Laura Ingraham pressed on Attorney General Sessions. And he sort of accepted the framework because he responds by contrasting this zero-tolerance policy against inbound immigrants and children to Germany's treatment of what he views as outbound migrants.
Nazi Germany, concentration camps, human rights violations. Laura Bush has weighed in, Michelle Obama, Rosalind Carter, got all the first ladies going back to Eleanor Roosevelt. She's apparently weighed in as well. General Sessions, what's going on here?
Well, it's a real exaggeration. Of course, in Nazi Germany, they were keeping the Jews from leaving the country.
Now, against this backdrop, today, Donald Trump is doubling down in this speech on his child separation policy. He's also literally wrapping himself, take a look, giving a big hug to an American flag. You can watch it twice. It looks the same way both times. If you have a sense that things are starting to come off the rails in America right now, that things are getting worse, we can report for you tonight there is a lot of evidence to that end. Let's speak plainly. Your federal government openly admits it's using innocent children as a pawn in an international effort at what they call deterrence. Your government creating camps to detain these children. And the President of the United States is lying about his own policy in a way that is brazenly sloppy, even by his own standard, the kind of lies that actually gesture at one of the more significant questions an executive can ask the rest of the nation in a constitutional democracy. What are you going to do about it? I'm joined now by California Congresswoman Judy Chu. She met yesterday with some of the children separated from their parents at facilities in California. Enrico Morones, a founder and director of Border Angels and the Chicago Tribune's Clarence Page. Congresswoman, starting with the facts, what did you see on your tour?
Yesterday, 14 Congress members, including myself and Leader Nancy Pelosi, went down to the border in San Diego to go to one of these shelters that is housing these children. We saw 62 children ages 6 to 17 who were either unaccompanied minors or were separated from their parents. And it was just overwhelming to see these really young kids, as young as 6, being there by themselves, traumatized by the situation. We were able to talk to the mental health counselors who told us what these children are saying in private, that they feel lost, they feel abandoned, they do not know where to turn next, and they are scared for their lives. And this is not the America that we know.
Is this a consequence of what this Congress that you're a member of has passed, or a consequence of Donald Trump's zero-tolerance orders?
This is solely the responsibility of President Donald Trump. Donald Trump issued the zero-tolerance policy. This is what is causing these young people to be separated. Now over 2,000 of them that have been separated from their parents. And Donald Trump has the ability to reverse this. He could call Jeff Sessions right now and tell him to stop this separation of children from their parents. So yes, it is squarely at the feet of President Trump.
Enrique, many things are polarized in America right now. This is an issue that, as the light has shown and the facts have emerged, the attempt to politically polarize it has become, I think, more difficult. We showed in our intro some Republicans claiming they're against it, although they're not acting on that in the Congress tonight. Take a listen to some of the coverage on the right.
Since more illegal immigrants are rushing the border, more kids are being separated from their parents and temporarily housed in what are essentially summer camps.
Some have referred to them as cages, but keep in mind, this is a great big warehouse facility where they built walls out of chain link fences.
They're saying these child actors weeping and crying on all the other networks 24/7 right now. Do not fall for it, Mr. President. These kids are being
I'm so
coached.
sorry, we have to go.
They're given scripts to read by liberals.
Your response, Enrique?
I'm just outraged. I have been to these facilities. We have been working on the front lines with the people that cross the border or are on either side of the border for more than 30 years with the Border Angels. And a society is judged on how we treat our children. And what is taking place right now is horrific. Donald Trump, without a doubt, is pure evil. No other country in the Americas has walls. No other country in the world separates children from their parents. And to call them child actors, or to have Laura Ingraham laughing, or Jeff Sessions quoting the Bible, same quotes that were used to justify slavery, is outrageous, is unacceptable. People are dying right now because of the wall that already exists. 11,000 people have died because of the 700-mile wall that already exists. We've been putting water out there for more than 20 years. I have dealt with these children. In 2014, we took in more than 100 children that were fleeing violence, much of it caused by U.S. policies in Central America. These people have no legal way of entering the country. They're desperate. And most undocumented people in the world do not come to the United States. There's 250 million around the world. The U.S. has 11 million. But the U.S. is a country that for a long, long time, people looked up to. No longer. What Donald Trump is doing is pure evil. And Jeff Sessions and Pence are right side by side, as are the Republicans. Donald Trump signed an executive order and changed this policy. It's inhumane, and I and many people were crying right now when you played the tapes of what was heard a couple of days ago in the centers. It's horrific. How can people do that? That hasn't happened in this country since the time of slavery. It hasn't happened in the world since the time of the Nazis. And Donald Trump is right there with them. So I'm ashamed. It's an embarrassment. It's horrific. And we need to be outraged and pay attention. We need to make a change. Donald Trump represents the worst of the American spirit.
And Clarence, the White House, as we've reported, strenuously denies aspects of this. They certainly object to some of the historical comparisons. I should mention we've invited Mr. Miller and others on this show, offered them ample time. They're not taking us up on that at this moment. But Clarence, your view of all of this?
Well, that's what's striking to me, Ari. If you're going to have a policy like this, own it. President Trump ran for office on this immigration issue. He was distorting it from the day he announced his campaign. And now that this policy has been implemented and the administration is getting some blowback, he wants to say, well, it's all Congress's fault. They're the ones who created the law and blah, 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 which is not true. He changed the policy. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced it, and the Department of Homeland Security has implemented it. This comes right out of the Trump administration. And now other Republicans are upset in Congress, those who are getting blowback from their home districts or senators from their home states. But at the same time, they put themselves into this situation because they've stuck with Donald Trump because of some things on his agenda are shared interests that they have that they want to see passed. But now it's like they're holding these children hostage in order
Clarence,
to get Donald Trump's wall.
You're hitting.
And,
let me ask you about that, Clarence. You're hitting that point. You use the word hostage, and this is such a key point because there are always federal policies that have what is sometimes inartfully referred to as collateral damage. What we don't usually see, to your and Enrique's point, and I would think that the Congresswoman was alluding to this as well, we don't usually see the claim that the collateral damage, especially to children, is itself a goal, a quote-unquote deterrent. Take a listen to the administration struggling with that very issue.
Our Department of Homeland Security personnel going to separate the children from their moms and dads?
Yes, I am considering, in order to deter more movement along this terribly dangerous network, I am considering exactly that.
Are you intending to send a message?
I find that offensive. No, because why would I ever create a policy that purposely does that?
Hopefully people will get the message and come through the border at the port of entry and not break across the border unlawfully.
Is that policy meant to be a deterrent or not?
Hallie, I don't think it's so much meant to be a deterrent as it's really just trying to enforce a law.
Clarence, this goes to the moral heart of this. Is this hurting children by accident, somehow, quote unquote, unavoidably, or is it the deterrent goal? You see there on tape people like John Kelly and others admitting it's a goal.
No one will admit to hurting children on purpose. The fact that people want to dodge the reasoning behind the passage of these laws, of which was to try to have a deterrent to people wanting to come across the border. Again, there's a certain hypocrisy to wanting to dodge responsibility for a law which is admittedly flawed. We're talking about our immigration system does need reform. It has for a decade, but it's been a mess in Congress because of gridlock, and part of it's because of the kind of wild accusations and the wild baseless statements that have been made about how we need to have closed borders. We can't have open borders. It's not a question of just having wide open borders versus having nobody come in at all. We're talking about having a reasoned and orderly process and system set up, and we can't do that as long as everybody's just yelling at each other.
Congresswoman?
Yes, I think that we need to make sure that we have comprehensive immigration reform that has been stuck and stymied because of Republicans' objections to it. But the children should not be a bargaining chip in this process, and that is exactly what is going on right now. They are being used as a bargaining chip for $25 billion worth of funding that Donald Trump wants for the border wall. These are horrendous situations where the lives of these children will be affected forever just because of money that Donald Trump wants for that border wall. And that is not right.
We've gone a quarter of the hour, Enrique. With the brief time we have left, what's the key fact you want people to know about the truth on the ground?
The fact that these people that are coming in, that they have no line to get into. the people that are desperate that are crossing the border. And those that do have a line apply for asylum, and Trump calls them animals and MS-13.
Right.
There's a lot of lies out there. These are human beings.
Right.
We should be treating people with dignity and respect. We need humane immigration reform. It wasn't the Democrats' fault. It's one person's fault. It's Donald Trump.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.